Hello and welcome to the IELTS multi-step program. Today, we're going to be dealing with the listening section of the IELTS, which is one of the most challenging areas that most non-native speakers of the language have problems with. Why is this? For a lot of people, when you ask them, what is the challenge that you have with the listening? You hear things from, I can hear what they're saying, it's too fast for me, some of the words are quite mumbled up or jumbled up, and I have problems with maps, with interpreting maps in the listening. I have problems with the last section of the IELTS, with the IELTS listening, where you have one person talking for such a long time. All these challenges, all these complaints are the frequent things that you hear from most test takers. And over the years, we've compiled a series of tips that are guaranteed to help you navigate your way through all these challenges or the frequent challenges that most test takers have. For those of you watching from home, I would advise you to please avail yourself of a pen and a paper and take your time carefully to listen to every tip that I will be sharing in this video, as they are practical tips that you need to take your time to put into practice and see how you can deploy them before the day of the test. The listening test in the IELTS entails the test taker to listen to a tape and answer questions that will be assigned to that person. It follows this format. It is the same for both the academic and the general training models, as there is no difference for the listening test. You have 4 sections with 40 questions. All questions carry equal marks, which is 1 mark. In section 1, you have social context topics, where 2 speakers interact over context or things that could happen to any of us in a social setting. You could have examples of things that you could have there. You could have someone call to make an inquiry. You could have someone call to clarify a deadline or a timetable. You could have someone also call to clarify a particular schedule. All these things are all social context situations, and they are easy and very clear. And most times, people do not fill the first section of the listening test in the IELTS. Section 2, you have a monologue. In section 1, it's a conversation between 2 or more speakers. In section 2, you have a monologue, which is 1 person talking. And this time also, it is also in a social context. Section 3 is usually an academic context, where you have a conversation between 3 to 4 speakers. Oftentimes, the topic of the conversation revolves around things that you could find in an academic setting or you could find in a school. Section 4 is a monologue, and it's also in an academic setting. Usually, you would hear a lecturer giving a talk or giving a lecture in a classroom, and you will be asked, or you will be tasked to pick out specific information from the tape that you will be listening to. All the recordings in the listening section are played only once, and you will not have an opportunity to listen to it again. So you need maximum focus for the listening section of the IELTS if you intend to succeed. 40 minutes total duration for the listening section of the IELTS, 30 minutes to listen to the tape, and 10 minutes to transfer your answers into the answer sheet on the day of the test. Tip 1. Practice for the listening section using the official answer sheet. Download it, print it out, and familiarize yourself with it. Why is this important? The listening section of the IELTS has a peculiar answer sheet designed for it. Most people have problems transferring their answers, which they would have either marked or highlighted on the question paper, onto the answer sheet. And oftentimes we discover that test takers do not use the 10 minutes allotted at the end of the test. They do not use it well in transferring their answers. For a lot of people, they have a problem with shading. For some, they have a problem with actually writing with pencil in the small boxes that are provided on the answer sheet. There is no use getting to the IELTS and having the first time that you interact with the answer sheet being that day that you're sitting in the exam hall. It is better, it is practical, and it is wiser for you to have constant interaction with the IELTS answer sheet before the day of the test. So download it, print it out, or better still, get it online or get it from someone who has written the test before, and make sure that you practice as much as possible to familiarize yourself with it. This is the first and most important tip that you need to know for the listening test. The second thing you need to know is this: the listening test is a multitasking activity. You are at the same time listening, reading the questions, and then writing out your answers. 3 things: listening, reading, and writing. This means that if you do not practice, and the day of the test is the first time that you have any interaction, that you have any exposure to the listening test or to the format of the listening test, you're in for a shock. As much as possible, please practice as much as possible before the day of the test. Tip 2, you only hear the recording once. I know I mentioned this before, but it is worth repeating. You only hear the recording once. Why is this important? For a lot of test takers who practice for the test, you see them playing the listening tape more than once just to get their answers right. So you see someone practice a listening test, which is supposed to take a total of 40 minutes, and they use 2 hours to practice that test. And at the end of the day, they come out feeling, oh, I'm so good. I got 40 over 40. I got 40 out of 40 in the test. No, sir. Newsflash, you did not get 40 out of 40 questions. What you did was to waste so much time, which will not be given to you in the exam. If you really intend to practice, you should, as much as possible, practice under exam conditions with a timed test. Ensure that you finish the listening test in the time allotted. So for those of you who practice, or for those of you who will be practicing, endeavor not to pause the tape, not to rewind the tape, or not to listen to it another time again, because on the day of the exam you would only be allowed to listen to the listening tape once. Tip 3, use a pencil. Now this might sound like an obvious tip, but it is a tip that a lot of people disregard and they end up getting into trouble for. The answer sheet for the listening test in the IELTS is a computer-based answer sheet. It is marked by a computer, and it would also be fed into a computer for them to read the data on it. If you're using a pen, chances are that you might have your ink blot out some key places that the computer is supposed to read. So the most preferable writing material to use in the IELTS, preferably for all the sections of the IELTS, is a pencil. But we'll get into that in more detail when we get to the reading and the writing sections. But for the listening section of the IELTS, you are using a pencil, preferably a pencil that is dark and legible. Tip number 4. You can write all your answers in lowercase or in uppercase, except in instances where the speaker or the instruction on the test states specifically that you write in a specific case. Preferably, I would advise you to write all your answers in the uppercase. And why is this? If you're writing in the uppercase, chances are that your writing is going to be much more legible, it's going to be clearer, and it's going to be quite big. And also, writing in the uppercase ensures that you automatically slow down the pace of your writing, which ensures that you would have lesser errors in writing, which will be smudged, or you're writing in a cursive and everything just goes in a sprawling arc that nobody can read. Ensure that your writing or that your answers are as legible and as clear as possible, because there's no point in you getting down the correct answer which nobody or no machine can decipher. There are some specific questions that would require you to write your answers in a specific case. For example, in a conversation between 2 speakers where one person asks for an email or asks for a website, and speaker A says, oh, the website is www.prepclassng.com, all in lowercase. That statement specifically clarifies that your answer should be written in lowercase. If you write that type of answer in the uppercase, you will get your answer wrong. So ensure that you are clear about the case that you are putting down your answers in. Is it in the uppercase or is it in the lower case? If you're writing in the uppercase, ensure that you stick to it throughout, except for cases where the question or the instruction says otherwise. If you're writing in lowercase, ensure that you stick to it throughout also too, except for instances where the question or the instruction says you should do otherwise. The next tip, which is tip 5, that you need to know and you need to focus on for the listening test is this. Ensure that you comply with the instructions attached to all the questions. I've discovered that a lot of test takers over the years fail in the listening test or in other sections of the IELTS because they fail to read instructions. I'll repeat this. Every piece of ink on your question paper in the IELTS is important. Again, every piece of ink on your question paper in the IELTS is important. Read all instructions. Ensure that you understand what the instruction wants you to do before you attempt any question. A key type of instruction that you will be getting in the listening and the reading sections of the IELTS would be instructions on the exact number of words to write for a particular answer. So you could have a question and you would have the instruction reading, you may write one word and or a number, or you write no more than 2 words and or a number. Your competence in deciphering and interpreting these instructions is an integral part of your success in the listening or the reading section of the IELTS. Please ensure you do not exceed the exact number of words that you've been instructed to write, or if you're writing below that number of words, ensure that you're getting the key word in a series of words. What do I mean? If you've been told not to write no more than 3 words and the answer to your question in that listening test is, for example, the paved quadrangle. I'll repeat that. The, T-H-E, paved quadrangle. And the question says that you should write no more than 3 words. The operative word, the key word in that question is what? The quadrangle. And the adjective that qualifies what type of quadrangle is what? Paved quadrangle. If I write paved quadrangle as my answer, I would get the right score. If I write the paved quadrangle, I would get the right score. But if I write the paved only without writing quadrangle, my answer would be wrong because quadrangle is the head word in that phrase. The next tip that you need to be very, very particular and aware of is this. Spelling is important in the listening test. It's a listening test. You are expected to write out your answers or to pick information from what you can listen to and write it out. Which means that if you write out your answer and the spelling is wrong, you cannot be assumed to have written down the correct answer. Please ensure that you write down the correct spellings for every word, for every answer that you're putting down in the listening section of the IELTS. The challenge for most non-native users of the English language comes in 3 places. The first one is a number, that is plurals. A lot of people write down answers and the answer is a plural that requires an S or that requires an IES. And most times you find people writing down the singular form of that particular word. This would ensure that you get the wrong mark for that question. Another challenging area where people have a lot of problems with, where most non-native speakers have a lot of problems with in writing down the answers for spelling in the listening test is part where they mention names, that is proper nouns, which are names of people, names of places, and names of probably streets or objects. Here's a news flash for you. If a name is mentioned in the listening section of the IELTS and it is not a common English word, it will be spelled out. What does this imply? Once you hear a word that is spelled out clearly, or if the speaker or any of the speakers takes the time to spell out a word, please know or be assured that that word is an answer for one of the questions that you're going to be facing in the listening section. Any word that requires to be spelled and is not a common English word will be spelled out. For every other word that isn't spelled out, the assumption is that it is a common word in English language that a test taker should have no problem writing down the correct spelling. Spelling is important, essential, and it is assessed in the listening section of the IELTS.